Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology, From the Ground Down. Presented by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Join us as we explore the fascinating world of the Bible from leading experts in the field of archaeology.
Good morning, my name is Dr. George Sparks. I have one of my favorite guests today, Dr. David Graves. He is also still in Canada. I thought he's going to be far, far away in Portugal. And then we had a little problem this morning with the electric. So we're getting a late start, but we're here anyway, folks. And this is going to be a really good podcast on his book, Jesus Speaks to the Seven Churches. This one's going to be Laodicea, which is going to be one of my favorites. As you know, he is a PhD from the university from Aberdeen in Scotland. Also, he was assistant professor at Liberty University. He's been at several locations throughout the Middle East. Well, I can't just say several. 35 years of traveling. He's been in, of course, Israel, at the Temple Mount, Tel El Makarter, one of the biblical choices for one of the cities of the early conquest. And also he's excavated as my square supervisor years ago at Tel El Hammam.
Welcome to Laodicea, an ancient city full of history and culture. It is one of the seven churches mentioned in Revelation chapter 3 verses 14 to 22. It is located in the fertile Lycus River Valley in the southwest region of ancient Phrygia. Situated 53 miles southeast of Philadelphia, this city was an important center for trade and commerce. It is just 6 miles south of Hierapolis and 10 miles west of Colossae. During the Roman period, it was part of the region of Caria. Today, Laodicea is just 4 miles north of the village of Denizli, situated on the banks of the Lycus River. This city is also known as Laodicea on the Lycos to distinguish it from other cities of the same name and highlight its connection to the Lycus River. Note that the aqueduct in red runs in the south from Denizli to Laodicea and does not cross the Lycus Valley to Hierapolis as some commentators have suggested. The map of the modern area around Hierapolis, Laodicea, and Colossae identifies the cold and thermal springs. As we journey through the ancient city of Laodicea, we cannot ignore the magnificent site of Hierapolis, just across the valley. This city was not only mentioned in Paul's letter to the Colossians, but it was also a neighboring city to Laodicea. But what made Hierapolis truly stand out was its renowned hot springs with its natural pools created over time from the minerals in the water. These natural wonders were believed to have healing properties, drawing people from all over the region to bathe in its waters. The calcification pools were a sight to behold, with their vibrant colors and unique patterns. It was a popular destination for both locals and travelers, seeking to relax and rejuvenate in the healing waters. In antiquity, there was a medical school located here and they produced an eye salve from the byproducts from the hot springs. Today, the remains of Hierapolis serve as a testament to its once thriving civilization and its famous hot springs. The strategic location of Laodicea at the crossroads of two major imperial routes played a crucial role in its rise to prominence. Situated at the convergence of the east-west road, which connected Ephesus and Syria, and the north-south road, which linked Pergamum and Sardis to the port of Italia, Laodicea quickly became a hub for trade and administration. As one of the major hubs for trade and transportation, Laodicea was built upon its strategic location along key roadways. However, this also proved to be a major disadvantage as the city lacked a reliable source of fresh water. During the dry summer months, the nearby Lycus River would often dry up, leaving the citizens with limited access to drinkable water. To facilitate this problem, they built an aqueduct from a cold spring in the south near Denizli with several pumping stations that have now been excavated in the city. The pipes are lined with the residual calcification naturally found in the water. Since 1999, Jalal Simsek has been the director of the Laodicea excavation, working out of nearby Pamukkale University, and has accomplished significant reconstruction work wanting to turn it into a tourist destination like Ephesus. Simsek's dedication to this project has not only brought new life to Laodicea, but has also given visitors the opportunity to experience the city's fascinating history firsthand. The message to Laodicea mentions that they are to be hot or cold but not lukewarm. The all-important question here is, why Jesus prefers either hot or cold to lukewarm. All our books are listed on our website smyrnaean.blogspot.com and can be purchased on Amazon. More details and sources can be found in our commentary, Jesus Speaks to 7 of his churches.
So if you would please, we have today Dr. David Graves. David, thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
Good to be with you, George, as always, yes. Yeah, well, our last city today is Laodicea of the 7 churches in Asia Minor. I mentioned in the book of Revelation, chapters 2 and chapters 3. Laodicea is situated in the Lycus River Valley. In the 2nd century, the population was about between 25,000 and 50,000 people. So it was a fairly large city. It was named after Antiochus II's wife, Laodicea, or Laodicea. And so that's where it gets its name from. And it served as the capital and the judicial center for the region. It was primarily a very wealthy city due to the textiles, the black wool and banking industry that Cicero mentions. So it was a prosperous location. But it had one thing that was actually a detriment to its location, and that was the lack of good drinking water. Fresh water was a problem in the region, and the reason for that was because of the hot springs, thermal underwater hot springs that polluted the water in the region. The message of Laodicea, Jesus mentions that I know your works, that you are neither hot nor cold, and I would that you were hot or cold. So then, because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of, or spew you out of my mouth. So scholars have often speculated as to what reference that was in the city. So Jesus compares the tepid waters near the city, which produce vomiting, to the lukewarm spiritual life of the Laodiceans. But to understand that, you need to understand the water system, and the water system in Laodicea is somewhat unique. As I said, it lacked adequate fresh water, with the Lycus River drying up in the summer, and so they couldn't get the water from the river. So the drinkable water at Laodicea came from the Carsi Mountains. Now, what's interesting about that is that the aqueduct, there's about 5 miles of the aqueduct still visible that runs from Denizli in the south. That was a source of the Carpus River and the fresh water that they would receive for the region. Now, some scholars, some commentators often suggest that the water supply came from Hierapolis across the valley, that had a hot spring, and there were a lot of pools there that people would walk in and bathe in, and it had some therapeutic benefits. The problem is that the aqueduct doesn't run to Hierapolis, it runs in the opposite direction. And the scholars that don't know the geography and the archaeology don't realize that. In fact, one commentator has published an article saying that the proof of the water coming from Hierapolis is the calcification inside the pipes of the aqueduct. The problem is, again, the aqueduct runs in the opposite direction. It doesn't run across the Lycus Valley. It runs up behind Denizli. And so the archaeology basically proves his theory wrong. The water, of course, had calcification and minerals in it, and so that was the reason why the inside of the terracotta pipes were corroded with a calcification inside of them. To understand what Jesus said, we need to really understand the reason why hot and cold are positive and lukewarm is negative. So that is, I think, quite significant to understand. Why does Jesus say being hot or being cold is good, but being lukewarm is bad? So when we analyze not just the water system, but we analyze the cultural background, we find that the Romans said that lukewarm drinking of wine mixed with water, it can be hot, it can be cold, but lukewarm was a no-no for the Romans. You never served lukewarm wine or drinks in the Roman period. And so the banquet picture, I think, is what's being referred to here, showing the positive and the negative with what Jesus is talking about. Some suggest that it was the hot water from Hierapolis, but they didn't get the hot water from Hierapolis. Some suggest it's the cold water from the cold water spring in Colossae, and that's fair. That's where they would get some of their drinking water from. They would not be drinking lukewarm water. And some have suggested that they mixed the hot water from Hierapolis with the cold water from Colossae, but they didn't do that. The aqueduct doesn't support that at all. However, the idea of drinking the wine that was heated is supported by the archaeology from Pompeii. There we find they have these, what would you call them? They were like thermopylum. It's where they would heat up the water, a little bar that you could walk up to and get your hot wine heated. And this is supported by many references from Plutarch and many of the ancient writers. And they also have a thepsa. And this is it looks just like a coffee machine that you would get these days, a large coffee machine. They put coals in the bottom of it underneath, and they would heat the water or the wine up inside of a thepsa. And we have also wine strainers that they would use to put their snow in, and they would cool the wine as well. In antiquity, they mixed their wine with water, but they wanted it either hot or cold. And there are references in antiquity where they say lukewarm was something that they never did. That was what the barbarians did, to drink their wine lukewarm. So the archaeology seems to support the idea that what is being referred to here is that only the barbarians drank their wine unmixed. And so they always wanted it hot or cold. And this idea actually goes back to Jeremy Taylor in the 1600s in his commentary, the whole works of the Right Reverend Jeremy Taylor, where he says the feasts or sacrifices the ancients did, sometimes they drank their hot drinks, sometimes they poured cold upon their gravies or in their wines, but no service of the tables or altars were ever with lukewarm. Wow. So he picks that up as well in the 1600s, and Koster, a modern German commentator on the seven churches, has reinforced that, and I would agree with them in their support of this is the explanation for the hot and the cold, of why lukewarm in their culture was so abhorrent and so adverse to being used for their banquets.
Okay, Dr. Graves, let me go over this as the way I understand you're saying it.
Yes.
In comparison to the way I believe it was taught in the congregations today, and as I was taught and what I believed until now, because you're pretty conclusive using this archaeology, that what I was taught, maybe the listening audience would agree, that I was taught that the hot water was coming down from the hot springs to a certain point, and that was used for healing because Jesus, of course, is healing. And then we have maybe a lower level, maybe a spring, the fresh water, and that's what the people would drink because it's refreshing in the gospel, and the good news is refreshing. So we could have the hot water used for healing. We kind of think of spas today, right? You go to the spa and you're sitting there and it's all chill, and everybody's got their cold drink too, a little umbrella in it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's with our imagination, we're somewhere up on the mountain in a side room in our mansion with our buddies, the mansion over the hilltop, going Pentecostal on you. And then we have our little hot spring spa and our little cold drink. And that was the metaphorical, you could say, picturesque that I think I've been taught. That's the way I used to see it. Hey, you know what? That was a good thought. That was a lot of fun. But through archaeology, we learned that in the ancient culture of the Romans, that's just not how they preferred their drink.
That's
That
right.
they actually mixed it with either hot water or cold water. That's like saying, do you want a hot cup of coffee or do you want a frappuccino? But nobody ever says, just give me that stuff that's been sitting there for a while, the lukewarm coffee. That'd be a way we could. I don't see Starbucks doing that.
No,
And now I think we could understand it, right? If I put it, yeah, who wants lukewarm Starbucks? Well, no way. It's either going to be a frappuccino or it's going to be hot. And I think I get it now.
yeah. Now
But
you can see.
all right, I just want.
You can see Hierapolis across the valley from Laodicea. I have photographs where you can see the white calcification pools across the valley on the other side. The problem with everybody saying that was the water that was lukewarm or hot is that the aqueducts do not go across the valley. They come from the other side behind Laodicea, south to Denizli. And that's where they were getting their water from. That's where the aqueduct was supplying their fresh water to. Now, Hierapolis is an important city. It's mentioned in the New Testament. They used the materials from those hot springs to produce an eye salve that was famous. And there was a hospital in Hierapolis. The people at Laodicea would certainly know about the medicinal purposes of the water. But I don't think that's what Jesus was directly referring to in the 7 messages to Laodicea. I think it was the banqueting idea that nobody serves anybody lukewarm wine. It has to be either hot or cold. And that's where they would understand it as a local reference and from a cultural context. Even though the water certainly was an issue in Laodicea, that would also heighten their senses to this idea of hot and cold. I don't think that's the specific reference that the local people at Laodicea would have gravitated to. So my take is it's a banquet reference rather than to the water at Laodicea, which was significant and which was still important. But that's my take on the message to Laodicea.
It's very interesting because as we've been talking about the letters to each individual church in the book of Revelation, through your education in archaeology and using that in each and individual site, we are now able to understand what was implied to each one of these churches, and that they were using, or John was using, through the Spirit, their individuality, their culture, their surroundings, what was provided to them in a way that they would understand. It may be using a metaphor to them, but to us, still a metaphor. I'll just use myself as an example. Misunderstood, especially this last one. I think many people have heard the popular message of the hot and cold mixed together, becoming the lukewarm. So now you have this sulfur water, hot sulfur water, mixing in with the cool water. And that's what gives it this better stinky smell. And nobody would ever want that. That's what I pictured in my mind. I think that's what many people would picture. But in this cultural reference and in your research through archaeology, the direction of the water flow through the aqueduct, they did not mix. They
That's
still
right.
were independent of one another. So therefore, now we say, well, we can't use the archaeology to make this conclusion. Where can you? So you looked at the Roman culture, the culture that lived there at the time, and what they did. I could say if we were thinking of individuality, but you put it more like in a setting, maybe like a feast or a banquet where they come together to have a good time. And that's where they would either do one or the other. It'd either be mixed with hot water, or the wine would mix with cold water. In the epistles, it mentions briefly about have a little wine for your belly's sake. Now, when
Mm.
they're mixing the wine with the water, yes, it would flavor the water, um, but would the alcohol content that was in the wine actually could it kill parasites in the water? So that way, he says, take a little wine for your belly's sake. Could it also have
Yes.
a medicinal purpose?
Yes, that's why they would dilute it. They would dilute it down because it would actually kill the bacteria that's in the water. The other thing to note is that the fresh water that came from Denizli in the aqueducts also had a high mineral content, and that's why we find the calcification and deposits on the inside of the pipes from the aqueduct that we find at Laodicea. So it doesn't necessarily have to have the water coming from Hierapolis. The water actually was filled with minerals and over time corroded, and just like an artery you might have in your heart that has the cholesterol that builds up on the inside. This is what happens with the pipes from that region, using it for over a long period of time. So because it's such a volcanic and geological structure in the region, you have these minerals that build up in the fresh water. But the fresh water came from the opposite direction to those hot springs in Hierapolis. So commentators need to do a little bit of work on geography as well as archaeology to get their facts straight before they pontificate a solution we find in the commentators that gets repeated and repeated and repeated by everybody when they really don't have a good ground to stand on, pun intended.
Right. Well, I love archaeology. I still bought into it, and
Yeah.
so I'm not bragging, but I got my master's in archaeology from Trinity Southwest. So I've had years of archaeology, years of collecting artifacts and working with museums. I still got it wrong. So we learn from each other, and I really appreciate our time, and I it's part of what we like to call the peer review. That I listen to somebody, or we should listen to somebody's experience and research, and make a comparison. And you've convinced me that my last belief of the hot and cold water was not correct. And now it refers to the drinking of or mixing of the wine with either hot or cold water in a banquet setting. Now, that'd probably be true both if I could say in the faith, the Jewish or the Christian faith at that time, as well as in the Gentile sector, because it would be a way of staying healthy if you could afford it.
Yes.
So it does make a lot of sense that would be the case, because if we just use the scenario of the hot and cold water flowing down, and when it mixes together, then it becomes that lukewarm, and that's not good. Okay. But when we think of the wine mixed with either hot or cold, it also has this medicinal purpose that makes us well, that makes us healthy. Or back, I say us, but those back in that time period. That is very significant too, because we could talk about using another metaphor, misunderstanding of the scripture, misuse of the scripture, a contamination of the scripture, and how it hurts not just those of the faith, you could say a Christian faith, but those around us as well, to misunderstand or misinterpret. And you did that very well with the the meaning behind what was, this is cool, the 666, right? How many thought out when I grew up, of course, there's another one, right? All the 666 in your forehead or on your hand. So then we thought it would be maybe those little scanning when they first came out, I think it might have been in the 70s, the little scans. Well, first it's on our product, but someday they're going to try to put it in our hands. And you probably remember the satanic panic of the 80s and 88
Yeah.
reasons why Jesus is coming back. And we can see how far misunderstanding can go. And it can spread throughout the whole community of, we'll just say, of believers in Christianity or in even throughout a Gentile sector. And
How
to
many
me,
how many people today actually understand or know about gematria and how it was used by the Hebrew people, and how prevalent it was in the archaeological evidence that we have, even from one of the seven churches, where you have a name turned into a number on the wall, etched in stone, literally, and people don't realize the significance of that to the actual people who lived at that time period, and why John makes reference to a name turned to a number, 666, and how it was a reference to Nero at that time period. So we need to pay attention to the archaeology and the geography of the period to better understand what we're reading in the text.
right, that's true. And also, we could say just because there's archaeology involved in the research, the archaeology has to be correct too. And I think in all circumspect, we have to be aware of our own bias that might throw us into a curveball. Maybe at that time in my life, I think I was in my early 20s. I was involved with the Pentecostal faith, you know. So I think, of course, that also swayed my the way I was thinking at that time. So to be aware of, the scriptures, also the archaeology, and our personal bias on how we are reading the text, and everything has to be under circumspect. That means some form of peer review outside of our own Scooby Gang, because if my circumspect would be within my own Pentecostal church, basically they would just be confirming what I already thought I knew and believed. But so that's why you're from Canada and I'm from the United States.
I must say that a lot of work has been done to reconstruct Laodicea in the last 10 years. Silau Simsek is a Turkish archaeologist that has done a lot of work doing reconstruction at Laodicea. And so he has excavated the theater there, the amphitheater. He's done a lot of work on a couple of the temples. And so it's quite remarkable what he has done to restore. The photograph, of course, behind me has a lot of reconstruction that has been done. Those are some of the temples that he has restored. He wants to turn Laodicea into a tourist destination similar to Ephesus, where people are going and are quite impressed with Ephesus, but he wants to do that with Laodicea, and he's doing a lot of really good work on the restoration and the resurrection of that city that when I was there was basically still laying in ruins after the earthquake that had destroyed it in the first century. So I would encourage anyone that is able to go today to take it in and have a walk around. You'll get a good sense of this rather prominent city in the first century that's mentioned in the book of Revelation.
Right. Yeah, that's a pretty neat picture behind you there. The restoration of Laodicea, and the capitals look absolutely, or the columns look huge on top of the base. That's got to be heavy. And then you can see how they built the columns in sections, and on top of the columns, very elaborate capitals.
Yes.
And then you got the lintel, a lintel on top of that. There's only
And
one way I can think how that could ever be constructed, and it'd be the use of giants. I had to say that.
Well,
But it looks fantastic.
the Romans did have their cranes that they could use to lift these large pieces of stone. It appears that a lot of them are Corinthian capitals. The time period, the theater is quite remarkable. I mean, when I was there in 2008, it was all overgrown. There wasn't hardly anything there, but he's excavated all of it and replaced and repaired a lot of the seating. It's quite impressive, built into the side of the hill. There's a large theater and a smaller theater. So it's quite an impressive site to go to today to actually visit. And I would encourage people that go to Turkey to take it in as one of their destinations.
All right. Well, we had a lot of fun, but I'm out of time. I thank you for explaining to us the mystery between hot and cold at the Church of Laodicea. Doctor, thank you for your time.
Thanks, George. Always a pleasure.